Hello and welcome to World Talks on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. Brent Sadler, Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation, joins us to break down the tense Iran-U.S. nuclear talks in Geneva, with Tehran under domestic pressure, Washington deploying a massive naval force, and past conflicts are still fresh in the memory. We'll explore whether diplomacy can avert a crisis or if military action is looming. Brent, welcome back. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you for having me back.
All right, so before we kick off, there's a short soundbite I'd like to share with you and the audience, and I'll get your take on it.
Okay. So I'll be involved in those talks indirectly, and they'll be very important. We'll see what can happen. It's been typically, Iran's a very tough negotiator. They're good negotiators, or bad negotiators. I would say they're bad negotiators because we could have had a deal instead of sending the B-2s in to knock out their nuclear potential, and we had to send the B-2s. I hope they're going to be more reasonable. They want to make a deal.
The United States and some European states persist in the imposition of unlawful sanctions, military threats, the engagement in force posturing, and the issuance of explicit references to the possible use of force by the United States, including significant military deployments in the region. Such actions constitute a continuing violation of the prohibition of the threat or use of force as enshrined in Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the Charter of the United Nations, and must be brought to an immediate and unconditional end. Distinguished delegates, Iran has always been prepared to engage in meaningful and result-oriented negotiations. Any sustainable agreement must ensure the full recognition of Iran's legitimate rights, deliver tangible benefits, and be safeguarded against unilateral actions that undermine trust and credibility. According to these principles, and as a result of the good offices by our friendly countries in the region, which we are very grateful, a new window of opportunity has opened, under which we had the second round of the negotiations with the United States earlier today here in Geneva.
Right, so that sounds like a carrot and stick approach is being taken by President Trump. What do you make of both sides of that topic?
Well, I think clearly the Iranians are playing a very familiar game, one, and that is to run the clock down to try to buy for time. And hopefully by the time the summer comes around here in the United States, domestic politics will so distract the administration that they think that'll buy them, a reprieve from any attack or any further, actions against them, either be sanctions, which I think that should be expected, or military action, which I think the odds are increasingly high for that. There's really nothing the U.S. should or is in a position to offer the Iranians. It's the Iranian regime that has violated any sense of trust in the past and has to actually earn that from the rest of the world. And most notably, top of the list is the United States, a country that this regime in Tehran has killed hundreds of Americans over the years and continues to support terrorist organizations that do target American interests and American lives. So it doesn't appear clear to me that they're interested in making a deal. A lot of very nice words are great at diplomatic venues, but the reality on the ground and their military operations signal very different from what you're hearing.
Right. So when they talk about negotiations, what are they negotiating?
They're trying to run the clock out. They're not interested in making any type of concession from their part, but simply to try to run the clock out in the hope that the United States, as many past administrations, felt, compelled for domestic political purposes to concede or to pay cash to the regime in order to get a deal on paper. This was the 2015 deal, the nuclear deal that the Obama administration signed, that saw billions of US dollars being released to the regime and really not getting much in return from the Iranians in return that would ensure they never had a nuclear weapon.
Yeah, so the Iranians committed to not pursuing a nuclear program to receive those monies. What's the point of negotiating when they've got a track record like that?
That's a very good point, and I think this administration under President Trump is basically at the end of the line of that type of approach. And the regime in Tehran needs to understand that very quickly and offer up real concessions on their part in order to get trust in the West, specifically in the White House here in Washington, D.C., before anything can be moved forward in a peaceful way. The military forces building right now, if they continue on this trajectory, will be used.
Right, now, it's not just the nuclear weaponry that's of concern to President Trump. It's also the demonstrations that have been going on in Iran. We've got a news blackout, but news is still getting through, with thousands, perhaps, of people, of demonstrators being killed or imprisoned. What role is that playing in the dynamic here?
Well, it was an interesting, and I think it was the right point to make, but it does come across as a red line when President Trump said to the Iranians, last month, stop killing the protesters. They seem to have relented, only to then very quickly kill about 30,000 of their citizens on the streets, and they continue to round up their own citizens. There was, just days over the weekend, going into a village and effectively rounding up the entire village, putting them under arrest. Perhaps many will face execution if they feel that they are a threat to the regime. So the killing and the purges continue, despite the news blackout. You're right, some of that information gets out, but there should have been earlier actions to try to ensure the Iranian people had access to media and information so that the world would understand what this regime's all about.
Right. So also Iran, has control over the Straits of Hormuz, through which huge amounts of shipping passes, and they've recently carried out exercises in those straits. How much of an impact or influence do you think those exercises have had on President Trump's response?
Very little in the calculation in Washington, D.C. The maritime traffic that goes through the Straits of Hormuz really doesn't bear much on the U.S. economy and on the military. There's lots of other levers and options for the U.S. to operate from, notably Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, as well as a host of other bases that the United States is being hosted by allies and partners across the Middle East. So the Straits of Hormuz and the Iranians doing exercises there, it's not uncommon. It's also not going to change the calculations in D.C.
And finally, in the last minute or so that we have left, Brent, the role or influence of Israel over American policy towards Iran.
Well, I mean, I don't think there's any untoward influences there anymore. There would be from the British government or the Japanese allies that share deep common national security and national interest, and in many cases, deep historical, religious, cultural connections. The United States and Israel has all of those in spades, and as a trusted ally in the Middle East, that's long-standing. So I think it's not influence from Israel to the United States. It's a common national security and national interest that's driving these decisions. And of course, President Trump and Netanyahu have disagreed. Most notably, during the summer attacks against Iran, there was a strike that was actually in the middle of the negotiations that Trump called Netanyahu to have him reverse those fighter jets back so they could allow negotiations to go forward. So they don't always agree, but the end state's still very much in alignment.
Understood. Brent Sadler, unfortunately, we're going to have to end it there, but good to see you again, and thank you very much for sharing your analysis with our audience. Have a good day.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks. Bye now. And that brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks. Don't go away, lots more coming up. Goodbye.